everyone. Here's the rest of our wonderful panel. This is going to be fascinating for me as a writer, because the other panelists are much more experienced in the big world that we all face in our art. Penelope Brackett is a master coach, excuse me, founder of the Creative Seed Career Coaching Performers Roadmap. She's nationally recognized in the field of career coaching, especially with creative artists, and also corporations, including she coaches actors, musicians, dancers, publishers, and people in design. She creates a successful career strategy built around passions, strengths, and style, health, and well-being. I'm going to consult her. She has been on the Today Show, in the New York Times, Child Magazine, and many radio shows. She co-founded the first graduate program in, I think that's not you, that is Debbie. Dian, I am going to have to ask you to introduce yourself because I didn't look at the page that your bio is on. So please do that.
Sure. My name is Dian Killian, and I am the founder and director of an organization in New York City called the Center for Collaborative Communication. And I'm also a certified trainer with the International Center for Compassionate Nonviolent Communication, which includes having compassion for yourself, which is, I think, why I've been invited to speak here tonight. And I'm also author of 2 books on that subject. And I'm also a musician in addition to being a writer. So I'm glad to be here because I think our inner critic's going to definitely come up around creative work. And I'm experienced that myself. And I'm also a certified life coach, so I also do coaching and combine my work in NVC with coaching. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great. Debbie Millman is president of Sterling Brands, where she has worked on the redesign of over 200 global brands, including Colgate, Nestle, Kraft, and Pepsi. She is founder and host of Design Matters, the world's first podcast about design with over 1 million downloads and a Cooper Hewitt National Design Award. She's author of 6 books, published in over 10 languages, and that's just a little bit of what she has achieved. So we are going to begin to address this question of the inner critic with the question, what is it? And I'm sure we all have one. I think I would like, who would like to start? What is the inner critic? And I guess I would add, what good does it do us? We'll deal with what negative it does to us a little bit later, but what good does it do us?
Just lead off?
Yeah.
I'll give it a start. I think one of the challenges of the inner critic is that the inner critic's always present. And I say it's a challenge because I think most of us think that they shouldn't be present, that we're going to get rid of them, push them out the door eventually. And I think certainly as my experience as a coach and in my own life, that you can count on them coming back. And in fact, the more that you take on challenges, the more they will come back. So sometimes you work through things and, they start to, you start to see them a little less present at your auditions or your performances, but then maybe you go into a different kind of role, or maybe you work up a notch, or, you do something in a little different genre, and all of a sudden, they come right in the room and sit down next to you, and it's like, okay, you're here. And I think that that's the response. That's sort of as a start off. I was just talking to clients, last night, and again they were saying, when am I going to get rid of this person? They keep coming in and sabotaging me, and we said never, never. And what you really want to do is get to know them better, get them know them when they show up, and how you're going to manage that. For some people, they can say, send them out the door and say, go sit outside. I'm going to go in my audition. When I come back, you can, rail at me again. Some people can just have sort of feel like they're at the cocktail party and then say, okay, I'm going to go talk to them now, So to me, I think the inner critic is ever present, and in a sense, is saying that you're out there taking on new challenges. So that's the good part, and maybe saying, here are some things to think about. But they're just one person at the cocktail party, and I think you want to, let them be there, but make sure that you're engaged in the conversation.
Yeah, let me pick up on that a little bit. I think it depends a lot what kind of inner critic you have. I think it depends how you grew up and what sort of support you got from your family, from your parents. I grew up in a very traditionally uptight WASP family. My father was a lawyer, my mother was a housewife, and they had incredibly high standards about everything that I learned pretty quickly were going to be impossible to meet. And so that's what my inner critic is. My inner critic is my father sitting there and listening and frowning and nodding and then to something I had written, and then saying maybe nothing. And I just had to keep going anyway. The good part of this is that when I had my second play produced out in California at South Coast Rep, it was based on people that I had known. It wasn't really strictly autobiographical, but I was pretty sure they would recognize what I was basing the story on, and I thought I was really nervous about it because someone who had been ostensibly straight in the play was gay, and I thought my parents were going to both be upset about that. So I was so terrified about their reaction that I sat in the light booth to watch the play. I couldn't even sit in the theater where they were. I sat in the light booth, and I had a direct view of my parents sitting in the first row. And this was a comedy. My father never laughed once. My mother laughed through, a lot, and that was gratifying. And then after the performance was over, I did not see them at intermission. After the performance was over, I walked out, and my father said, "Liz, you've written a very good play." I was dumbfounded. I was overwhelmed. I said, "Thank you, Dad," and I took a walk around a circle in the grass, and I just burst into tears. Tears just dripped, and then and then it stopped. That was a gift, and I had finally pleased my father. Let's keep going on the inner critic.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say I resonate with points that I've heard both of you say. First of all, that often these critical voices, we can have more than one form, are things that we've heard often from our parents when we were younger that we've internalized. So it's kind of like an internalized form of repression. And having said that, though, I think our inner critics have something really important to tell us. They just, as I put it, have a speech impediment. And what I mean by that is, they're motivated usually by fear. And if you think about it, when a dog is angry and when it's snarling, we're interpreting that as the dog is being threatening, and we're afraid. Actually, that dog is scared. So I'm mentioning this point because even as human beings, when we're afraid, it's not our intention, and we usually come across other people as aggressive. So it's the same thing with our inner critic. I think usually our critic is afraid. We want to be successful. We want to be effective. As a coach, if I notice I have that kind of dialogue myself, I'll stop and ask myself, well, what does that mean, Dian? You want to be successful? I want something concrete. But the point is, I'm nervous, I'm scared. And the way the inner critic, with its speech impediment, expresses that is in a very critical way. If we can listen to what the critic actually cares about, what its fear is about, if we can have empathy for that inner critic, then I find we can transform it. And speaking about younger voices or younger parts of ourselves, what I like to do with myself, because like I said, I'm a musician, I'm working on a CD right now. My inner critic can really come out, especially on my vocals. I'll listen to what this younger part of me is saying, have empathy for that younger part, and then my adult part will kind of do a reality check. It's like, okay, if you were listening to this on the radio, how it would sound. Actually, it sounds okay. The younger part of me is like, oh, is that one little microsecond pitchy? And my sound engineer will go, Dian, that's not pitchy at all. So I don't know if that makes sense. To do like a reality check with what the younger part or the critic is saying, have empathy, and then to say, wait a minute, as an adult self, how does this look? So I find that a really effective combination for myself and also with my clients that I work with. So I hope that's helpful as a start, but listen to what the critic has to say.
Debbie.
I'm going to take a slightly more scientific perspective about fear and inner critic. Mostly, I think the inner critic comes from a part of us that wants to know an outcome, and because we don't know what that outcome is, we tend to worry about it. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be well received? Is it going to be rejected? And because of the way our brains are configured, we are under this impression that somehow, if we knew, we would feel better. But the fact of the matter is, because of the way our brain is organized into three parts. It's called a triune, three brains in one, triune. The reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, or the limbic brain, or the middle brain, and then the neocortex. And the neocortex is a part of the brain that you all love. It's about abstract reasoning, language, arts. It's all about the sort of the things we consider with most being human. The limbic part of the brain is the part of connectivity, why we take care of each other, why we rear our children. We're not reptiles. We don't eat them if we're hungry.
Unless we're really hungry.
But the reptilian part of the brain, the oldest part of the brain, it's the part of the brain that sits right on top of the spinal cord. And that's a part of the brain that is responsible for all of our involuntary action, all of our involuntary behavior. So if you were to walk across the street when you were leaving here and almost got hit by a car, that feeling of adrenaline that would come up wouldn't be something that you could control. You wouldn't be saying, okay, now adrenaline, kick in. It just happens. It happens involuntarily. We have absolutely no way of controlling it. And in many ways, that is our inner critic too. What happens is, as humans, we want to know the future. We want to know what's going to happen next. That's how we feel secure. We think, oh, if this is going to happen, if I have enough money when I retire, I'll be great. That's a way of planning something we can't control, or something that we try to control with money. Anything we can't control, we feel nervous about. Human beings don't like anything that is ambiguous. We always see ambiguity negatively, always. So if we see our future in an ambiguous way, we will perceive it negatively, we will be worried, we will be afraid. The problem is that feeling of fear is involuntary. There's almost nothing you can do to say, well, I'm going to feel good when this happens. I'm going to feel good if I lose this weight, or if I make this money, or if I get this part, or if I do anything that's going to make me, what I think will make me feel better. When I was researching sort of ways in which actors and performers can use this, I came across a really great story about Barbra Streisand. It was in the New Yorker a couple of years ago. And there was an interview with her manager. And the interviewer wanted to know what was really her great talent. And he's like, if you think her great talent is acting or directing or singing, you're wrong. Her great talent is doing all of those things with debilitating stage fright. And I thought that was amazing. So it's Taming the Inner Critic, I was really thinking about the title a lot in the last couple of days in leading up to the event tonight. And I thought, I don't know if it's so much as taming the inner critic, but learning to live alongside the inner critic that's going to pop up whenever we feel nervous, or whenever we feel like we might be in danger, or whenever we feel like we can't control the future, which is just about all the time. So I think that one of the things to take away from the Barbra Streisand anecdote is sort of to live with it as is, to know that it's there. What do you do with it? Do you allow it to control you? Do you allow it to take over your future? Do you allow it to stop you from doing the things you really want to do? Or do you do it anyway because you have no other choice? Your life depends on it.
What a great story. I have a story about that is about a friend of mine who is a very well-known poet. Her name is Sharon Olds, and she won the Pulitzer Prize year before last. She her work is extremely transgressive. She's been called a pornographer, and she writes about sex and sex with her husband, and she's gotten.
What's her name? No.
And she's been both praised, and she's enormously popular and successful, and then achieved the pinnacle with the Pulitzer, which was a book about her divorce from her husband. And she had written about her marriage as if it were a blissfully happy marriage for almost 30 years. And then we found out in this last book that wasn't the case. She also grew up in a family that was very very critical and impossible to please, and in addition had an alcoholic father who was abusive. She's written about that too. She's very different in persona from her work, and she found that her inner critic would just at times be overwhelming, and so she performs a ritual to get the inner critic out of the room. She thinks that they're two different parts of her, and when she's writing, she has to get that part out of the room, and she does this huge dramatic ritual of going around her room and screaming and flailing her arms and yelling at the critic and saying, "Get out of here! I hate you! And you have no place here." And it works. When I myself have been, it's certainly worked for her. And when I've been in a really tight spot with my own work, I've done the same thing, and it's pretty satisfying. And for actors who work with your whole selves, who are putting your everything that is in you at risk. To me, it's just awesome what you have to. The story about Barbra Streisand is awesome, and what actors have to do in an audition, and the rejection that you have to tolerate, to me, is just impressive. And of course, it is fear, and I wonder if that would be useful to actors in taking these risks that you have to take to really pull up, from the depths of who you are, something that is going to make people really pay attention.
What's interesting, though? I don't have a lot of contact with performers. I teach design, and I spend most of my time talking with designers and brand managers and brand consultants. And one of the things that I teach is I teach undergrads how to get a job when they graduate in design. And one of the things that we try to uncover over the course of this semester is what their personal mission is and what do they believe in, and why are they doing what they're doing. And as we start to talk about why they're doing what they're doing, a theme always comes up. And that theme is, well, design is a practical discipline. I'll be able to make some money as a designer. It'll be easier than being an artist or a performer. And I'm always struck by the notion that these kids at 20 have already given up their big dream, that they're thinking about doing something because it's practical. And I think that's why Kate, the woman who coordinated this event, found me. I did a commencement speech about what it means to take a practical path. So if you're all here and you're designers, I mean, you're all actors and performers and writers, like, what gave you the courage to say, I'm going to follow my dream? I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to be a writer. I can't even begin to tell you how many people I come in contact with that have already given up their dream at 20. So what is it that gave you that courage? What was it? What gave you the ability to tame the critic that said, that's not practical? How are you going to make a living? What if you don't ever win an Oscar? What if you don't get that part? That's the part that so many people are envious of and don't have. So I would say find what that courage was that gave you the sense that you could do it in the first place, and just keep concentrating on that.
You know,
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. And I think, what Liz, what you were saying about, finding that ritual, and Stephen Pressfield, who does the art of the War of Art. I always go, War of Art, Art
Great
of War.
book.
War of Art. He talks about his own rituals. And I think, whether you're a writer or an actor, for a writer, there's a famous quotation, maybe you remember who said it, I never do, but it's not writing that's hard, it's sitting down to write. I think that there's the parallel, whether it's acting or writing or directing or whatever, it's always that breakthrough moment that's difficult. And finding whatever your ritual is to get you started, because that courage is there, but it gets obscured. Elizabeth Browning, I don't know if anybody worked with Elizabeth Browning, she's a wonderful acting teacher, and she does an exercise, I felt like I had to give her the acknowledgement, where you sort of get yourself cloaked in that all of that stuff you say to yourself, about I can't do this, it's impossible, it's impractical, it's blah 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 blah, because that stuff is all hanging around anyway, or that person at the cocktail party. So you have that covering, and then you sort of imagine you're taking a zipper, and you unzip the whole thing, and you step out of it, and let yourself, and as actors, you have the ability to really, put yourself in that place and really, let like Alien or something, step out of that cloak, so that pure self, so the self that is courageous can step forward and really move on the things that are truly meaningful for you. I think finding your own, whatever your own conceptual way, whether you're shaking sage or you're stepping out of your baggage, your cloak, it's really essential that you find a way to manage that critical voice or person.
Yeah, another thing that comes to mind is what do you mean by success? I think that when you're young, everyone, you mentioned, winning an Oscar, winning, a Tony, whatever. Everybody has that dream of being great, and of course, that's just a tiny fraction of people who go into the arts or try anything, who achieve mega success. And I think that it's important to define what success means for you, and I think it changes over time, and I wonder if other people have that.
I just wanted to add to that, the fourth step in the model that I teach as a nonviolent communication trainer is making what we call a clear, positive, doable request. And when I'm working with my coaching clients, I often ask them, what requests are you making of yourself? Because what we often will do is make requests in effect, like the one I mentioned earlier, well, I want to be successful or I want to be effective. And that, in my opinion, is undoable. What does it actually look like? what does it look like for you to be successful? If you're going in to try out for a part, I want to do this really well. What does it mean to do it well? I love the example you gave about Barbara Streisand. Does it mean for you to go in and to have a level of equanimity that is maybe 50% more than you had the last time that you did when you tried out for something? That might be, quote, your level of success for that day. So I think it's really important to make it doable. What does it look like?
I don't know if anybody out here has a support job.
You mean a day
Maybe? Yeah. I like to call it a support job because I think it's something that should truly support your acting career. And that means not just monetarily, but also supports you. You feel like you can go to that job and still maintain your sense of self and spirit and be out there in the world. But that can be challenging. And I was on a call. I do small groups called Performance Road Trips. And on a call just last night, and somebody was saying, it is freaking hard, maybe they didn't use that word, freaking hard to show up for that support job and to feel like I'm not doing the thing I really want to be doing. I'm doing a lot of other things, and they were, somebody who's actually had a reasonable amount of success, was out there performing, had a film in the film festival, a lot of good things happening, but still was showing up for a lot of their day at this day job. And, what we talked about in that group, and other people talked about too, the other kinds of things they were doing and how they showed up in a way that gave them energy. And boosted their self versus gave fuel to the inner critic. And a lot of that was about maintaining that creative, generous self. She was talking about, being part of throwing a party for somebody who was leaving, and nobody else was going to do anything for, But bringing that, she had incredible producer skills, incredible creative skills, love we know how much, love a performer can give, and really have an opportunity to show up and create something that was satisfying, create something beautiful in this environment. And that gave her energy for her own spirit, and then you can carry that forward. On the other hand, there's somebody else who's saying, yeah, but I'll stay there till 2 a.m. So you do know you have to balance it so that then you still have the energy to give to your career. And that's the conversation. How do you show up and give yourself fuel throughout your life and still make sure that you have the energy to pursue what's most meaningful? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And be proud of the fact that you are doing it.
And that's what your question about success,
right,
is that you are a creative, generous person wherever you are.
Yeah. Well, we have so many other interesting ideas here. One to me, this is about what we've been talking about. How do you measure success and failure? I think that's important. I think it's important to in terms of overcoming fear, which is essential to what we're talking about, and also to feeling good about yourself. It's really, really important to feel as great as possible about yourself. And when you do, it's you work better and you make other people feel better, and it's a great thing. And so I think it's really important to have an idea of how we measure success and failure. Any thoughts about that?
I think I'm not sure if I agree with everything that you just said about needing to feel great. Because I think a lot of us would be waiting for a really long time before we felt like we could do something if we were waiting for that. Although some people do wait for that, and I think that was addressed by what I said before about sort of the reptilian brain and knowing that might never happen. I think that where humans run into issues about defining and measuring success, I think depends on what they're using that for. So, for example, and I'll go back to sort of my roots as a brand consultant, there's something that occurs in branding that's called a hedonic treadmill. And the hedonic treadmill is essentially the phenomena that occurs every time a new iPhone comes out. So all of a sudden we feel like we need to get that new thing. And Dan Pink, who wrote A Whole New Mind, which is a great book to read, has said that if your idea of happiness or success is the latest widescreen TV or the newest iPhone, you're sort of chasing a fool's game, because those things only give us that dopamine rush, which is what we sort of associate with success or love or happiness for just a short while, and then we adapt to that feeling, and then we need something else. So if you're feeling the need to succeed at something in order to feel good about yourself, and this gets back to the original question, I think we're sort of using success to propel up, to buoy up a very sort of fragile center. And because of that, every time we do succeed at something or achieve something, it will never be enough. We'll feel excited for about 5 minutes, and then we'll start thinking about the next thing that we want or need to keep that hedonic treadmill going for ourselves psychologically, which isn't really, I'm not answering a question in terms of, well, what do you do about that? Ultimately, you do have to feel sort of good inside, but how you get there, aside from decades of therapy, is not something I quite understand, and the easy answer isn't there for me.
Right. I think that for me, what it is, the thing that makes, that is really hard for me, and the scariest thing for me, is to do something that seems, that I'm afraid to do, but I want to do, and I do it anyway. And I don't have an outcome. The only outcome is to do it anyway. Just recently, something I did that. I have this play called Grant and Twain. It's about Ulysses Grant and Mark Twain, and I wanted, it needs more productions, and I was having dinner with very important Grant scholar after his very important lecture, and he knows about the play, but he hadn't read it, and he knows me and likes me, and a little, and I thought, I looked at I had a pile of scripts that looked just beautiful, that I had a wonderful cover, the pictures of Grant and Twain, and I thought, oh, I think I should take this to John Marszalek, the famous Grant scholar. And then I thought, what? That is so pushy. That is so obnoxious. And I thought, no, why not just hand it to him and say, I hope you'll read it. Maybe he won't read it. Maybe he'll throw it in the wastebasket. You don't need to say anything more. Just say, I did it. And I was terrified. And I grabbed it at the last minute, and I took it to the dinner, which was amazing that I was invited to this dinner with these eminent historians. And he read it. After many, many weeks. Well, not that many. It was about 5 weeks. And I just heard yesterday, he loves it. Well, that's amazing. That's an outcome. But the best thing was that I had the guts to do it, and I was terrified, and I thought it was just obnoxious and pushy and wrong thing to do. I did it anyway.
So congratulations.
Absolutely.
When talking to my students about why they hold themselves back from doing something, what is the worst possible thing that could happen if you want to do this thing? Yes. So you have this big critic inside you saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, can't do it, can't do it, can't do it. So what is the biggest reason? And I do this every semester, and I make this really long list, and there's all sorts of reasons. And last semester, I had a student that said one of the most profound answers I've ever heard. And I think this is really at the crux of that inner critic. So what was the biggest thing that was holding him back from doing what he really, really wanted to do? And he said that he was afraid that if he failed, he would die of heartbreak.
Oh.
But isn't that true? We say, we don't think we're this enough, or we don't think we're that enough. But I think ultimately, if we put ourselves out there like that and we do get rejected, well, then what happens is are our lives over? And, getting back to the human sort of science thing, we're incredibly adaptable in the same way that a really terrible divorce doesn't necessarily kill us, might try to, but it doesn't, or any kind of loss, we recover. And the best anecdote I can share with you about that sort of adaptability that we have as humans is Pete Best. Has anybody heard of Pete Best, the fifth Beatle? So after he was fired from the Beatles, Ringo Starr took his place, and after their sort of mega success, the Beatles' mega success, he actually attempted suicide, and he was unsuccessful. A couple of years ago, there was an article that came out about him, and the title of the headline of the article was "Pete Best, the Happiest Beatle." And it was about how he'd sort of reconstructed his life and ultimately felt that his life was better as a result of everything that had happened to him. And we have this capacity as humans. We can somehow take tragedy and turn it to the best thing that ever happened to us. So if indeed the inner critic is the part of you that's saying, I don't want to do this because I'm afraid I'm going to get rejected and then I'm going to die, know that we can recover from those near-death experiences. And the only real tragedy is not doing it, because then we never know, and we keep thinking, you know, I'm waiting to be discovered, or I'm waiting for somebody to find out I can do this. You might wait forever, so just do it. And even if you do fail, the worst that could happen is that you will be heartbroken, but you won't die of that heartbreak. You'll just figure out a way to pick yourself up and try something else. I promise.
And you know what you were saying, Liz, about the, you know, that success. I mean, I think one of the things that's important is to count all the little successes along the way. Sometimes we're so busy, well, when I get that job, then I'll be successful. But we don't give ourselves that energy of each success along the way. I think of it like when you work on a draw, when you're a salesperson, you know, so you get paid. Let's say, you know, you get paid the $1,000, and then when you actually get the commission, you know, it goes against that, right? So in a sense, to me, all of the things that you do to, you know, make the call or walk up to the person and say, you know, here's my script, or, you know, can I be in your play, or, you know, calling up the agent. Actually, somebody said, you know, I can't call them. And I said, what's the worst that can happen? They're not going to represent you. They're not representing you now. So, but I couldn't. I had to tell that one. But you know, each little thing, you have to sort of give that, you know, you have to acknowledge and celebrate each success, because that's what keeps you going. I mean, yeah, there's the big success and you ought to go for it, but every day you got to pick up that phone. You got to step up and ask for the, you know, audition. You've got to, you know, it's all, that's what makes a career. It's not one action, it's every little action, and I think it's important to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that. You inspired me because I love gratitude. And, you know, self-gratitude is also really nourishing. I think gratitude is like life fuel. Think about what happens when someone says to you, wow, I really appreciate that. And by the way, in the spirit of asking for something specific, when someone comes up to me after a workshop that I'm leading or a concert, and they say, wow, that was such a great show, I'll ask them, can you tell me one specific thing you liked about it? Because that really nourishes me. Well, you had such great connection with the audience, or you had such a diverse set. Then I know something concrete. And I was struggling early on in this CD process, and I said, let me practice this, you know, self-gratitude myself, rather than just focusing on, I don't quite like the sound of this track. I made 2 columns, and the first column was, what do I really love so far about the CD project? And I listened to each song. There's 11 tracks in this album, and I had a whole list of things that I was really excited about. Gratitude for me, gratitude for my co-producer, the engineer. Then I felt really nourished. And then I said, okay, what are the things I want to tweak? And they were actually pretty small, this big, compared to the list of things I was happy with. It was the self-gratitude that gave me the energy. Because if the self-critic, if we have that in like supersonic stereo, it's hard to even go back into the studio and work another day on that. So you need that gratitude to keep going. At least I do.
Yeah.
Also, just to play devil's advocate for a second, I think that
Is that your outer critic picking on my nose?
no, not at all. It's just but I think that part of why this is just a theory. Part of why we're so nervous, apprehensive, fearful of our self-critic is that we don't feel comfortable with criticism. And so, again, going back to my students at SVA, they have portfolios. And to get a job, they have to show, 10 pieces of work. I don't know if it's quite the same way with acting, but I guess you have a reel, right?
Yeah.
They're so interested in finding out all the good things that people think about their work. I've asked them to start asking whoever they show their portfolio to say, if you were me, what one thing would you take out? And that doesn't mean you have to, but if 10 or 12 people that you really respect tell you the same thing, you might want to consider it. And mostly people are so afraid of soliciting criticism. And it's not criticism, hurtful criticism, it's criticism about the things that you don't know. You know the things that you know. And I'm a woman, I'm left-handed, I know the things that I don't know. I don't read music and I don't speak other languages, but I don't know the things that I don't know, and the only way I'm going to find that out, good and bad, or good and challenging, right, the challenges we have to overcome, are for other people to help me. So it depends on our response. So much of our response to criticism comes from our own, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because somebody criticized us in a certain way and we felt really terrible, that gets triggered, and as soon as somebody says something that could actually be considered constructive, becomes something that we have to ward ourselves against and we have to sort of lash out against, and it isn't always like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that so that really is getting into what is good about the inner critic. And what's good about criticism. I think it's really crucial to be able to listen to and also solicit criticism if you're going to get better, improve whatever it is you're working on. And we, it's kind of un-American to do that. It's because we so much believe in optimism, but yeah, I think that's just a wonderful point, and I wonder if there are other, what else we have to...
I just want to jump in because, again, I got excited hearing you speak about this because, to me, what's key is making it specific again.
Yeah.
The reason we have trouble hearing criticism, and, I coach couples about this, I work with organizations where there's conflict, we're usually generalizing. This just isn't good enough. I never get it right. You're not paying attention. On a positive level, I work with managers. I want more teamwork. What does it look like? What does teamwork look like to you? So I love the question you asked, which one would you leave out? If your self-critic is going into hyperdrive, ask for something specific. That wasn't good enough. What's one thing you'd like to see different? Then you can actually work on it. But if you're going into generalizations, that's about you intrinsically rather than your behavior. Focus on what actually happened and what you want to see happen. And make an incremental, I often coach people, what is the smallest next step you can take? Make the phone call, for example. Because if you're thinking big, generalizing, it's overwhelming. What's a specific thing you want to change? What's your next step?
And in light of that, you had said, I think both of you, pointed to in a sense, the outer critic, the people out there that can be critics for you. And one of the things is to make sure that the person you're asking is someone that you respect, who has, I know that an actor will say, I want to ask, just sort of get group feedback, but they may have a very specific acting style. They may be looking for something particular in this kind of work. And so it's important that you solicit criticism from people who have a similar aesthetic, who know how to speak to you, who speak your language. And, so that, and that's different. You're hired, then that is one thing, is if you're looking to get, then that's the actor's job to translate that criticism into something that's workable. But if you're looking to have support and get feedback, it's important that you find a network of people that really understand what you're going for and can respond with very specific criticism. And I think that core group, whether it's for, particular technique work or a direction, or it's just gaining support, you want to be very selective about the people you are on your team.
Yeah, I think, but I just want to reiterate how important I think it is to listen to criticism, and then, to use the wonderful AA phrase, take what you need and leave the rest. I teach writers, and in our program at NYU, we teach writing. It's cross-disciplinary, television, screenplay, and stage plays. Everyone has to take all three. And so it's it's a very challenging program, and almost all the classes are workshops. Everything I teach is a workshop, and the work is presented to everyone in the class, and then it's open to notes. And we what I feel they learn in the class, and what I have learned as in almost 30 years now of teaching young writers is to be honest. There's nothing more valuable than honesty, but it has to be truly honest, and it has to be, you have to understand what the writer is trying to say, and it can't be the way you're going to write it, because you change the story and make the protagonist the antagonist. Anyway, it has to be, you have to get into the head of the writer, but then you have to be truly honest. And the biggest thing that I've learned in teaching is that you can say something that is really, really tough. And if you say it with real honesty and compassion for the person, not trying to sugarcoat it at all, it will be heard, and it will help. It will help the writer. And I tell my students, I believe it fervently, that is the one thing that they take away from spending so much money to go to NYU. It's almost criminal, $60,000, $65,000 a year, and many of them are in debt for $200,000 when they graduate, and then they're trying to be actors and writers, and it's just, but
Okay.
but we who are teaching them I think they have learned to listen to criticism, to invite it, to accept it, to use it in the best possible way, and I think that's the good part of criticism. Well, we have, so that's maybe the positive role of the inner critic. Where does it come from? Maybe we've talked about that, but I think maybe we could talk about it more. Does it come from the outside world, from the world, the way the world measures success, or does it come from something within us that we can control? Of course, if it comes from the outside world, you don't have much control over it. This is a little anecdote about that, I think. I have a good friend, I love to play tennis, and I have a good friend who played at Wimbledon, and she's awesome. And I was playing in a tournament, getting ready to play in a tournament, and I said to her, I really want to win. I really think I can win this tournament. And she said, don't ever say that. Just say to yourself, I want to play my best. I want to hit every ball as well as I possibly can. Don't ever say, I want to win.
It's interesting because I think for some people that really feeds them that I want to win. I think competition for some people is really exciting to say I want to win and I want to beat that person, and it works. For somebody else, that wouldn't work for me, actually. It would work better for me to say, I actually, when I came into this and I thought, I read everybody's resume and went, whoa. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to learn something. I'm going to go and share whatever I have, whatever I know, and I'm going to go in and I bet I'll get, I'll learn something a different way, and it'll work for me to support me with my inner critic, and it'll hopefully support my clients too. But I find that some people, and it amazes, and I maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think for a lot of guys, especially, that the competition really works. I think that's true for women too. I just think, maybe because it's a gamesmanship, it's that team, that can make it really fun. And I think that points to, you've got to find what self-talk works for you. In terms of, like you said, to control that, whether it comes from out or in or whatever, it's whatever works for you. And I do find that for me, making sure that I have a regular practice a spiritual practice, a mental practice, a physical practice, getting out, running, meditation, doing those things on a regular basis. And for most of my clients, that's what really makes a difference. It's sort of as if you've created a foundation, a cushion, a buffer. So when all that stuff comes in, you've got, you sort of run the horse. There's some of that has been run off of you, and you can let things go. I think that a lot of us can feel that it shouldn't be that hard, and that's when I'll stop running, and then a week later I'll be like, So it does take. I think we have to manage ourselves.
Yeah, that's Debbie. I'm curious to ask you, because you have this amazing career with rebranding. That must have something to do with what we're talking about. You look at a brand and you rebrand it, and because it's not working in some way, right?
That's right.
I'm just curious. I would be really curious to hear you say something about that.
Well, what's interesting is the difference between an inner critic and branding. Essentially is that when you're rebranding something, it's because the outer critics don't like what you're doing. So you're sort of forced. Nobody rebrands when they're doing like super amazingly well and selling blockbuster. If they do, they're very, very smart in anticipating how the market might change and being able to adapt to that. Madonna did that very well early in her career. But when you're looking at a brand and you're rebranding, essentially I define branding as deliberate differentiation. So you're creating a very deliberate way of expressing what it is you offer. And if you can do that, if you can articulate something very specific that only you can offer, that only you are able to do, then the marketplace will be likely interested in what it is. If they have similar shared values or interests, or they're interested in something new, or if there's something that you're providing that's competitive to something that they might already have. So in this particular case, I think we're talking about external marketplace conditions versus an internal dialogue that's torturing us. And as far as the internal dialogue that tortures us, I think a lot of that dialogue gets created by our parenting, by the way we're parented. And I think that if we approach situations with a sense of a baseline of, I'm worthy of this, I'm worthy of doing this, I'm worthy of getting this, then we probably don't have a really loud, debilitating inner critic. If we come to something with, I need to do this to make up for everything I don't have, and this is going to prove I'm finally good at what I do and I value as a human being, then chances are no matter what we get, that inner critic is never going to be dialed down. So I think a lot of how we feel about ourselves gets played out in what we tell ourselves about what it is we're doing. That doesn't mean that you necessarily have to feel really, really good about yourself to get what you want. I think a lot of people go after what they want thinking that it will give them a great deal of happiness and success, and that's why so many people that are really successful end up in rehab. So
Yeah.
I just want to, you okay with me jumping in?
No,
Just
go
go-
ahead. We have some questions.
I love that you're laughing at my
That's great.
jokes. Thank you so much. You have no idea how good you're making me feel right now. Gratitude.
You've inspired me again. I just really want to advocate for compassion. Compassion for ourselves, compassion for our inner critic. I find with myself and people I coach in the trainings, we'll try to hush the inner critic, tell it to shut up, use kind of similar aggressive language that the critic is already using about what we're doing. So I love this Quaker expression. I'm a lapsed Quaker. This Quaker expression, which is what can love do? So what can love do for ourselves? And talking about how we were parented, I often tell to my clients, how are you going to reparent yourself? How would you talk to this critic? Imagine this critic was a 5-year-old saying, I'm not going to get it. It's never right. You never get it right. What would you say to that 5-year-old? I get it. You really want to be able to go and do this. And I know you can. Speak to yourself with the kindness, support, and compassion that maybe you didn't get when you were 5. Because you know something? No one else is going to talk to yourself like that other than yourself right now. So do it for yourself.
We have some really terrific questions here. I think so. Let's look at them. If you have had failure, how do you deal with the critic? You know it hasn't killed you, but it has stopped you from trying again. That's a really important question. I would say you just have to. You just have to try again. What
I
else?
just want,
can we-
know,
why is failure a permission slip for stopping?
Why is it bad?
So,
Right.
Failure is only a failure when you stop trying. When you're continuing to try, you're still in the process of hoping. Was Einstein said that the definition of insanity is doing something over and over
And
again and
thinking you'll
expecting
get a different result.
results?
Yeah.
I
That's
think that's the
humanity.
definition of hope. Doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for different results. I think that if you stop trying, it means you don't want it badly enough. It means that giving up is more important to you than continuing on.
Well, I think that's important that the objective has to be stronger than the obstacle. So your objective, your vision has to be so much greater and so much more exciting that you'll go over those past those obstacles. But I have to say something because sort of a past client is calling to me. And it's a little heavy is that this client came to me and said that she had to write this play. She really wanted to do this collaboration and to perform. She wanted to perform in schools, and she had a great idea, and she started working on it. And she had a collaborator, and she was working very hard. It was very exciting. Things were going really well. We worked together about a year and a half. Had a theater interested in, had the, sort of beyond, they were ready to workshop the production. It was moving forward, very exciting. And as I say, she was very committed. She said to me, failure is not an option. Well, she got pneumonia. And by the end of the week, she was dead. Was not sick, nothing, went out on a date, felt bad. She went to the hospital. She was probably my age, so I'm not that old. But the thing is, the sort of happy part of that story is that she came to me and said, it's not an option, I'm doing this now. And I am thrilled that I could support her in moving on this project. And she worked on it every day. And she was, talk about what success was. Success was engaging in that project. Success was moving forward, working on the play, having the collaboration, calling up the theaters, having the meetings, and she was completely fully engaged. And I think that everybody, well, I don't know, my definition of success is on the day you die is that you're fully engaged in your life.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, that you've lived it. I want to say something. I think that one important thing about being criticized, and because it's when you're criticized in the New York Times, if you're a playwright, and if your play is panned, I haven't had a play panned, but almost. It's. I think you have to acknowledge that how you feel about it. It's really terrible. It's really humiliating. And if you know other writers, other playwrights, it's not true of poets, it's not true of novelists. It's only true of playwrights because only the New York Times and Isherwood and Ben Brantley have that kind of power. And it's terrible. But I do think it helps to know other people who have suffered the way you've suffered. And because of my background, my tendency is to go into denial, and that's not really very useful. I think it's good to somehow express your anger, your grief, your frustration, your upset, and then go on. But I do think it's important to acknowledge how terrible it is to be publicly humiliated, which to me that's what it is.
And there's a lot of that now. It's not just the people at the New York Times. It's Twitter. You know, you could just be talking in a panel discussion and find that somebody's retweeted something that you said or tweeted something that you said and it was nasty, and then you feel really bad about yourself for a few minutes or longer. Dita Von Teese, the American burlesque actress and dancer, she has a great quote about this, and I'm going to hopefully not screw this up. You could be the ripest, juiciest peach in the entire world, and there's still going to be somebody who hates peaches. And that's sort of how you have to take these things, because the very things that some people might be criticizing you about might be the very same things that somebody else thinks is the greatest thing that ever happened. So it's very hard in today's world. There's so many people that are so anxious to criticize. There's so many trolls online that just do that to provoke and instigate, that it's very hard to keep that sense of self intact.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough world. I do know writers who have stopped writing. Not really stopped. I know one unbelievably talented young writer who won a huge prize when she was a young playwright, and she was savaged in the New York Times, and she gave up playwriting. She's writing movies and TV, and she's living in Los Angeles, but she hasn't written another play. So sometimes it really is terrible, and.
But you can, I'm just going to share something very personal. In 2003, I was really bullied online about a piece of work that I had done, about two pieces of work that I had done. And I came across it quite by accident. And it was I was called a she-devil. It was about some of the branding work I had done. It was some of the nastiest things that I'd ever read about myself. And I remember that day, it was one of the worst days of my life. I remember walking home from work thinking, oh my God, I have to quit. I don't want to humiliate the company I'm working for. I don't want to have this sort of ugliness of this situation sort of blur into anybody else that I care about at work. And I have to leave the business. I really thought that. I cried. It was so horrible. And ultimately, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because my response to that situation and then the subsequent events that happened from that situation turned out to be one of the most important things that ever happened in my life. Like, if that hadn't happened, then something else wouldn't have, that terrible thing hadn't happened, then that kind of good thing wouldn't have happened, and then that very good thing wouldn't have happened, and that amazing thing wouldn't have happened. And I'm not joking about this. I have a whole sort of talk that I do about how the very worst moments of your life could unwittingly turn out to be the best. So sometimes I think it's important to sort of feel it really, really badly, but not give up.
Yeah,
because it's only a defeat if you stop trying,
That's great. That's right. And that leads to this other excellent question. When was a time the inner critic was pivotal to a life choice you made? You pretty much were saying that, things led.
No, I actually think that wasn't a choice that I made.
The outer
That was a circumstance that occurred, and then a way that I dealt with it. I actually think the bigger choice is the choice that I talked about earlier, about living your life with your whole heart and going after, what you're doing is something that very few people really have the courage to do. I didn't. The whole failure speech that sort of got me to this place was about talking about how when I graduated, I made the choice not to do what you're doing. And then having to live with that decision and then sort of remake a life 10 years later when you realize, oh, wait a second, if I don't do this, then my soul is dying. So I think that's the biggest decision. You've already made the big decision. Now you have to sort of live with how to make that happen. But there are so many people that don't live their dreams, that don't feel like they're good enough or smart enough or talented enough or pretty enough or whatever enough. You've already decided I could do this.
Or I have to do it.
Or I have to do this, yeah. So
I just want to say, it's like the third or fourth time I've been inspired hearing you speak. But there was an anecdote, I think it was Brad Pitt, but it was a young actor was asking him something like, I'm not sure if I should be an actor or not. And he interrupted him and said, if you're wondering if you should be an actor or not, then I already know what to tell you. Don't be an actor. Don't do it unless you have to do it. But I mean, I think it goes what you're saying is like, make that commitment to yourself and then allow yourself to, quote, fail, because long as you're working towards your goal, you're going to have ups and downs. It's not linear. Nothing is linear in life.
and everything is hard.
Yes,
Yeah,
everything.
and
So
the
no,
only thing is, I think
seriously.
sometimes I was just going to say that sometimes I've heard that before.
About Brad Pitt?
No, I don't think it was Brad Pitt. I'd like to hear this. Never. That's another subject. But anyway, what I was going to say is that if you have doubts, you shouldn't be an actor. I've heard that before. And yet, what are you, crazy not to have doubts? It's hard. Of course you have doubts. You have doubts every day. I mean, I think that's the other thing we're saying is that there's a very good chance that at least once a day you're going to say, why am I doing this? But again, the objective, why you are doing it, has to be stronger than those doubts. I think that people have doubts, and I don't think you should be afraid that you have those doubts or that you have the inner critic.
Yeah, that's the Nike
it's
thing.
always at my table.
Have doubts and do it anyway.
Have doubts and do it anyway. And are we answering this wonderful question? An inner critic was pivotal to a life choice you made?
Well, actually, I know it's not exactly an answer to that question, and I'm wanting to also say we were talking, in effect, in my opinion, about the inner critic and also the outer critic.
Yeah.
What do you do when you get panned by the New York Times? In my experience, what happens when the outer critic results in someone like this woman you described who gave up writing is where we allow the outer critic to act like a stereo system for our inner critic. If our inner critic is agreeing in some way with the outer critic, that's when it becomes devastating. So again, if we can allow, okay, that critic is there, allow it, don't try to silence it, because then it gets even bigger. It's be with it, have compassion for it. Okay, you're an old friend, you're there, and I know I've got to do this, I'm going to do it anyway. What's the next thing? What's the next phone call I'm going to make, etc.
I guess I have a little story about an inner critic being pivotal, a recent one. For a long time, I have two really close friends. We've known each other and been and we started in an improv dance class together, and we've been and we had dinner once a week, and we've been really, really close friends for more than 30 years. And I've always had the idea of writing a play about this friendship of three women, and I thought, that'll be great. I can. It'll cover a bunch of years, and there'll be all kinds of things that happen, and there'll be three terrific roles for three terrific actresses, and they can play. And then I got permission from both of them to write anything, that any of the dirt that I knew about them, they gave me total permission to use. So I started on this play, and I thought it was no good. I wrote 30 pages, then I wrote another 10 pages. I had 40 pages. And I thought, this is just boring. It doesn't have any stakes. I don't know where it's going. I stopped writing it. And instead, I picked up another play that a subject that I was really interested in. I changed it radically, and I wrote the first act in 5 days. And then I took it to my playwriting group, and they didn't have any criticism. And the person I live with, my partner, Emily, who's a very successful children's book writer, and super critical herself of her own work, but nevertheless super successful, she read it too. She's my toughest critic, and she said, "It's good." So I was. That was my inner critic telling me that first play, even I thought it was going to be wonderful, and I knew it wasn't wonderful, and I threw it in the trash, and it's going to stay there. So we have two other questions that are great too. When is our inner critic just expressing common sense? In other words, I can sing, but I'm know Barbara Streisand. Therefore, auditioning for a musical of that kind may be a waste of my time. That's a pretty good question. Yeah.
I think one of the things that we're sort of distinguishing is when it's a critic, somebody who's actually having a critical eye and looking at something, looking at a piece of work, looking at a song and saying, has, like you were saying, very specific objections that says, this doesn't work, and and you can look at it and say objectively, no, it doesn't work. And especially if you have people that you appreciate and you show it to them and they go, yep, doesn't work. And like if you think you can't sing and you go to a teacher that you really believe in and you like the way they coach other people and they say, nope, can't sing. So, then that's a critic and that's a critical voice. And that's different, I think, than when we're talking about the inner critic,
Right.
which is the one who's yammering away going, I won't say this word, you stink. You can't do anything. Forget it. Hang it up. Your life's over before you began. Or your artistry is over. You don't have anything to offer. And that voice, it's the one that's, got a trumpet on it. It's so loud. It's just, as you were saying, very general. It's there to have you sit down and go back in and protect yourself.
Yeah, I want to just say one thing about common sense. I love common sense. I think common sense is really important. But it's also, to be an artist, you have to ignore it a lot of the time.
Uncommon sense.
I just saw a theater artist's performance that I am in awe of. His name is Taylor Mack, and I saw his 6-hour version. He's going to do every decade of American popular songs, starting in 1776 and ending in 2018. And he's going to finish with a 24-hour show of American popular song. So I went to the first 6 hours. It won't be finished for another year and a half. He is brilliant. I usually cannot bear to stay in the theater for more than 2 hours, unless it's a long day's journey or something just awesome. And I really walk out at intermission when anyway. 6 hours of Taylor Mack doing. I was not bored for 1 minute, and this is a theater artist who has always done from the very beginning. He started as a downtown performance artist. He just did his stuff wherever he could. Now he's becoming better known, and he does something that no one else does. And that's a story of somebody who just did it anyway. If he had auditioned, maybe you saw him in Good Person of Szechuan at the Public, but he mainly does his own things, these crazy performances that are just brilliant, and he's also super political, and it's just a treat it was a treat to sit there for 6 hours. You had to move around and do a lot of other things too that he told us to do in his wonderful way. But that's an example of someone, if you had described what he was going to do, what his career path was going to be, you would have thought that doesn't make any sense, that he's going to be a failure, don't do it. But he did it anyway. And
speaking of common sense, again, I like to bring things back to a practical level, which is, responding to this very specific question about, singing, what if I can't sing, etc. What are you going to gain by going and doing the audition? What are you going to lose if you skip doing the audition? And there's a book, I forget the title of it, maybe someone else in the panel or someone in the audience knows the name. It's basically like talent is overrated. Or, it's basically, I read the book, and it's basically saying there is no such thing as talent. Talent is someone who has worked a certain number of hours, reached critical mass, and had success. Someone like Tiger Woods, he so happens to have a father who got him, is it 10,000 hours? Right.
Outliers.
Yeah, exactly. Who got him practicing golf when he was like 2 years old. So for me, the question is, every time you sing, you improve. I forget who it was. I think it was... anyway, some jazz singers, someone did a compilation where they took like 30 seconds of him singing when he was like 20, and then each year and put it together. And I thought he was awesome at 20, but when you got to hear where he was when he was 50, and he just kept improving and improving and improving. So the point is, if you want to sing, as someone who's a singer, go and sing and do the audition. Sing every day. What are you going to lose by not doing the audition? That's the audition. That's the question I would ask.
Yeah. We have another question. What are some practical tips that could be useful in dealing with self-criticism when trying to balance a busy life? Oh, 5 minutes. We have 5 minutes. Thank you. Practical tips in dealing with self-criticism.
I think you have to work really hard. You have to work harder than anybody else to be able to get anywhere. And there are no shortcuts. And for those that are questioning whether or not to continue doing something because it's too hard, know that whatever else you choose to do instead is still going to be hard. You know, for my students that have decided they want to be a designer because they don't have the balls to be a painter, you know, I say being a designer is really hard work. Working at McDonald's is hard. Everything is hard. There is no easy way to do anything. So I think that we have to be really honest with ourselves in terms of the busy part of this, you know, in our busy lives. One of the things that have become my mantra is that busy is a decision. And we choose the things that we want to do because they're priorities to us. So if we are saying we can't do something because we're too busy, what we're really saying is that maybe watching Game of Thrones is more important than going to that audition, or because this and that is more important than working harder at this thing that I really want to do. And sometimes we use busy as an excuse to not do those other things. And so I think it's really important to be honest with ourselves. A practical tool would be in our busy lives to be really honest about why we're busy in terms of what it is we want to do.
Yeah, I think busy is a huge issue
But
because of the internet, because of
Yeah, but those are all
phones and-
decisions.
Yeah, they are.
But people are busy. I do want to say, and I mean, because I have clients that, you know, work a full-time job, go to their acting class at night, have children, you know, like, people are busy. I just want to acknowledge that I know that for some people, that really is hard to find the time. It does have to be a priority, though, in the long run.
Yeah, I think you have to
And
make the time.
You have to make the time. You have. I mean, I say those tips. First thing I say when I start working with clients is to have that physical, spiritual, mental practice. You have to do it, even if it starts out that it's 5 minutes. You know, and eventually you grow it. You know, I run. I hate to run, but I run because, you know, I can get up in the morning and, you know, 5:30 I can get out, I can run, I can come back and make pancakes for the kids. So I mean, you know, you've got to make it work for you. But you've got to do it because, you know, it takes a lot of energy to be a performer. And you have to be aware about when the critic comes in and what are your ways that you're going to work. You have to have that positive self-talk. And you need a great support network. You need to have people that you can talk to so that it doesn't take over. I think those are some of the basic strategies that I think are essential.
I like that a lot. I especially like having someone that you can talk to who's going to make you feel good. For me, that person is my daughter, who's a documentary filmmaker, and I talk to her every day, and I have the joy and pleasure of being her story consultant as well, and it just you need to find things that you know are going to make you feel good, even though it's really hard, and that's one for me. And also maybe talking to a friend who is going to be insightful and supportive, but no one beats my daughter.
I just want to put in
Mine either.
a word for morning pages. I'm sure many of you read The Artist's Way. We're talking about rituals. I do my morning pages pretty much every day. I maybe miss a day once a month, and they consistently save my butt. Because if my inner critic is activated, those morning pages give a space for the inner critic to do its ranting and raving.
What is a morning page?
Oh, morning
Yeah.
pages is basically, you write 3 pages every morning. It doesn't matter what kind of art you do. If you're an artist, you're a visual artist, you're a musician, you're an actor. And it's like free association. She suggests you don't read it to anybody. I have a really close, trusted friend who's also a writer. I mean, I'm a songwriter, but she does other kind of writing. We do share our morning pages. She recommends you don't. But it's just a space for you with you and yourself to kind of spill your guts, allow that inner critic to come out, hear the inner critic, or whatever you want to write about. But I find that really important. And I really love the other things that have been mentioned too, like meditating, or I do yoga, but for me, the morning pages really is the consistent thing that saves my butt.
I just want to pick up on one little thing. We set up here, the story of Brad Pitt or whoever it was who's said if you're not sure if you're an actor, then you're not. And for writers, if you're not writing, then you're not a writer. Sorry, no, not true. If you can be a writer and not write for a week or even a month or even a year, you can. I do believe that there is no such thing as writer's block. And a good friend of mine, Israel Horovitz, says there is no such thing as writer's block, but there is refusal to write. I think you just have to face that. That's what it is. But still, I don't think it's true that if you're not acting, you're not an actor. If you're not writing, you're not a writer. Something might have happened. Maybe you have to take care of your mother who's sick, or and you can't do what it is. So give yourself a break. I think our time is up. Or thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for these great questions.